if President Trump wins re-election at the end of this year, do you think that these comments about NATO and about Ukraine are a worrying sign of support for continued support for Taiwan? Do you believe that under a Trump administration that there would be continued support for Taiwan, or might there be a rollback of support? Thank you.
Well, I'm very confident that support for Taiwan will continue regardless of who occupies the White House, in large part because of what you're seeing here today. I actually think support for Taiwan in the United States Congress, which is supposed to be the dominant branch of our government. Article 1 is where most of the power constitutionally lies in our republic. I see growing and extremely strong support for Taiwan. And if you look at the work of our committee over the last year, the first report we released, the first major bipartisan thing we did, was a set of recommendations called 10 for Taiwan, which passed unanimously out of our committee, and then we turned about 7 out of those 10 into legislative reality via the National Defense Authorization Act. So I'm confident, regardless of how the presidential election goes, that we will maintain our support not only for Taiwan, but also a posture of internationalism and engagement. I think we all recognize that for America to succeed, we need to have allies and partners, and we need to look for ways to deepen those relationships, particularly as we look to reset simultaneously our economic relationship with China and reduce our dependency on China for critical goods. The only way that works is if we intensify simultaneously our economic and technological partnerships with places like Taiwan. And there I think we still have a lot to do. We've passed the double taxation agreement in the House in a tax bill. It needs to pass the Senate. I would personally be in favor of exploring a free trade agreement with Taiwan. There's all sorts of ways where we can revitalize that economic proactive agenda. And I think it's up to Congress to step up. So that, I'll say one final note on this, and I understand why the presidential election occupies such a big place and it is a source of media speculation. We've had kind of a debate in the last few months about certain things like, what are the guardrails we should put on American investment in China? Should we adopt a stricter set of guardrails? And we get a lot of pushback from Wall Street and people in corporate America. But something I say to them is that it's actually better for Congress to step up and legislate a solution to this, even if you may disagree with it or maybe a little bit more strict than you would have come up with. Because if Congress does it, if the legislature steps up and does it, it will last far beyond a change in a presidential administration. Otherwise, we go back and forth wildly between executive orders, and that's just a recipe for chaos. So my confidence stems from the fact that on our committee, we've had a great degree of bipartisanship, and I want to make absolutely clear that I think the people of Taiwan should be confident that America stands with them, even as we sort through a very intense political season domestically.
My name is Charlie Young, and I'm with Liberty Times in Taiwan. And my question is for Mr. Gallagher.
Sorry.
We're seeing China's expansion in the Indo-Pacific region, luring countries with diplomatic ties with Taiwan. More recently, Nauru and possibly Tuvalu. What's U.S. response strategy, and how would you interpret such actions from China? Thank you.
Great question. I think one thing that's come out of some of the tabletop exercises that we've done on the committee is that not only do we need to get the military investments right in the region, and I think that is the most important thing. We need to ensure that we're delivering on the foreign military sales that you've purchased, that we've approved, but have yet to be delivered. We have a $20 billion backlog. That's probably the biggest thing we can do to deter China and reduce its aggression. But we also need a coordinated economic strategy with our allies and partners, so we're not making up a response when China does something that could be labeled economic warfare. We're not trying to improvise what the sanctions response is. And so doing a lot more thinking with Taiwan, with some of our treaty allies in the region, about a coordinated allied framework to resist CCP economic coercion, I think is the direction we need to go. You mentioned Nauru. I think it's fair to say, and Mr. Moulton actually, we were talking about this earlier, he just returned, he was in Japan before this. it's critical that American legislators get to the region and express support, particularly in areas where we tend not to pay as much attention to. For example, right now in the United States, we're having a debate about renewing and appropriating money for the compact and free association states in the region. Absolutely critical that we do things like that. Developing expertise in countries like the Philippines, deep regional expertise, Indonesia, area where we know we're just going to have to stay engaged. It's my experience that attention goes a long way. And we just have to show up. We have to be here in the region, constantly signaling to our friends that we stand with them and constantly signaling to our enemies that we won't stand by as they pursue the route of aggression.
Thank you, Chairman. Eric.
Hello, this is Eric from CNN. Welcome to Taiwan. And I basically have a follow-up question to what Ben asked earlier. So over the last few months, obviously there have been growing debates in the United States about continuing to fund Ukraine in its war in its defense against Russia's invasion. What would be your message of reassurance to the Taiwanese people that they should not be concerned about potential U.S. commitments toward Taiwan, given the internal divisions over Ukraine? Thank you.
Well, what is it that Winston Churchill said about America? We can always be counted on to do the right thing after we've exhausted all the other alternatives. So just give us some time to exhaust the alternatives, and we'll eventually get there. But at least I'll speak for myself. I think and what we've heard today is that the outcome in Ukraine matters not only for Ukraine and American credibility, but for deterrence in the Indo-Pacific, for cross-strait deterrence. And increasingly what I see is a de facto alliance between China and Russia, and to a lesser extent Iran. It's you could call it an axis of authoritarian powers that is determined to undermine, if not destroy, American global leadership and our entire alliance structure that we've painstakingly built over the last several decades. And so I think it's important that we continue to fund with lethal assistance to Ukrainians, and also use this as a moment where we can revitalize our entire defense industrial base and make a generational investment in restoring our arsenal of deterrence so that we can surge production of and stockpile critical munitions here in the Indo-Pacific before deterrence fails. And that's absolutely critical because unlike Ukraine, Taiwan, as you may have noticed, is an island, and therefore it would be harder to resupply in the event of a conflict. We need to learn the lessons of why deterrence failed in Ukraine, apply them to the Indo-Pacific so that we don't find ourselves having to fight a war. We want peace, and though deterrence is very difficult, war is much more difficult. And so an ounce of deterrence is worth a pound of war, and that's what we're dedicating ourselves to, and I'm confident we'll find a way forward.